Mr. Coons, aye. Mr. Ossoff, aye. Mr. Warner, aye. Mr. Rounds, no.
On this vote, the yeas are 55 and the nays are 42, and the motion is agreed to. The clerk will report the nomination.
The judiciary, Judith E. Pipe of the District of Columbia, to be an associate judge of the Superior Court of the District of Columbia.
Ready? Okay. Mr. President.
Where are we? Oh, Senator from Kansas.
Well, thank you, Mr. President. I rise today to discuss a very serious topic, viral gain-of-function research. And I'm calling on this body to place a pause in all viral gain-of-function research, just like President Obama did in 2014. Maybe I'll start with an analogy. Could you imagine the United States participating in nuclear research and sending our scientists, sending our money to foreign adversaries to help them with their nuclear weapons research right now? Say a country like Iran or a country like North Korea. But of course, no one in this body would suggest that that's a smart thing to do. But people can't see what viral gain-of-function is, so they're not afraid of it, but they should be. Think about this. Nuclear bombs have killed 2, 3, maybe 400,000 people at the max. 2, 3, maybe 400,000 people. But viral gain-of-function research through COVID has killed over 1 million Americans, and then worldwide it's at least 10 times that, maybe 20 times that. And we still have 15 million long COVID sufferers. But we continue to fund, we continue to participate in viral gain-of-function research. And I would stop and ask this body, what do we have to show for it? 30 years of viral gain-of-function research, and what are the benefits? What have we benefited from this? And just like in January of 2020, when I was the first member of Congress to sound the alarm on COVID virus and the consequences and the pandemic that was coming, I'm here once again to sound this alarm. Think about this. Why is this a concern to anybody? Well, first of all, I want to just talk about the risk of lab leaks. No matter what biosecurity level this research is done in, there's going to be risk of a lab leak. There's human error. There's mechanical error. People not following protocols. We've seen it over and over again, and that's actually what led to the pause in 2014 by President Obama. Laboratories, regardless of their biosafety levels, are not infallible. Human error, equipment failure, unforeseen accidents can lead to the escape of enhanced pathogens into the general population. The consequences of such an event has proven to be catastrophic. We've witnessed this firsthand through the COVID-19 pandemic, then just how fast a virus could spread throughout the world. A virus that's engineered to be more contagious or more deadly can cause an even more severe global death crisis, even worse than what we saw with COVID-19. Something people seldom talk about is the threat of bio-research, of biosecurity when it comes to our food supply. Just like the Chinese developed a COVID virus to attack human lungs, they could develop new viruses that could attack our beef cattle, our pigs, our dairy. They could find new viruses to attack the wheat in Kansas. All these things are very feasible by viral gain-of-function research. And I'm very concerned about the risk of weaponization of these viruses, that all of these have a military potential, what we would call bioterrorism. Everything has a dual purpose. In America, we don't think about that. We always think about science being research for the good, but what we found over and over is rogue nations can use this type of research for the very, very worst. I just want to dive a little bit deeper into this subject and this threat of bioterrorism. Knowledge and techniques developed through gain-of-function research can potentially be misused by malicious actors. If detailed methodologies for enhancing pathogens are published or otherwise become accessible, they can be easily exploited to create biological weapons. These can be created by people with minimal means. They're called terrorists. They wouldn't have to go through the hassle, the time and expense of developing a nuclear weapon. They could develop even more easily developed biological weapons that are even more deadly. The potential for such misuse makes the dissemination of research findings in this field particularly perilous, and it lowers the barrier for entry for those who might wish to cause us harm. Ethically, gain-of-function research raises significant questions. Is it morally acceptable to create pathogens with pandemic potential, knowing the immense suffering they could cause if accidentally or, heaven forbid, deliberately released? The scientific pursuit of knowledge must be balanced with responsibility and awareness of their broader consequences. The principles that I swore an oath to as a physician: do no harm. Above all, do no harm. It should guide every one of our actions when we're funding science. But yet, gain-of-function research walks a tightrope between potential benefits and catastrophic risk. Public trust in science and research institutes is another critical aspect. Higher profile accidents or ethical breaches have eroded public confidence, making it even more difficult to garner support for necessary scientific endeavors. Transparency, accountability, and stringent regulatory frameworks are essential to maintain this trust. And that's why we're here today, calling for this body to pass our Viral Gain-of-Function Research Moratorium Act. Our bill will prohibit federal funding of this research, allowing time for an honest conversation about the pros and cons of gain-of-function research, setting up guardrails, and ensure a system of checks and balances. Getting transparency for the American people for what happened during the pandemic shouldn't be controversial. I hope my colleagues will join me in agreeing that if we can't measure it, we can't manage it, especially when we're discussing the creation of lethal viruses at the taxpayer's expense. The federal government should not provide another dime in funding for viral gain-of-function research in the deceptive name of global health and national security. For these reasons, I'm proud to be back here on the Senate floor to sound the alarm again and call for the immediate passage of our bill, the Viral Gain-of-Function Moratorium Act. I want to conclude by thanking Senators Braun and Lee for their support of this resolution, and we look forward to continuing the discussion on this issue with our colleagues. Mr. President, as in legislative session and notwithstanding Rule 22, I ask unanimous consent the Senate proceed to the consideration of Senate Resolution 718, which is at the desk. Further, that the resolution be agreed to, the preamble be agreed to, and that the motions to reconsider be considered, made, and laid upon the table with no intervening action or debate.
Is there objection?
Mr. President, reserving the right to object.
Senator from Massachusetts.
Thank you, Mr. President. Reserving the right to object, this resolution threatens fundamental life sciences research. Research is medicine's field of dreams from which we harvest the findings that gives hope to families. Over 1 million people died from COVID-19, and tens of thousands of Americans die annually from the seasonal flu. It is scientific research that develops the vaccines and treatments that save lives. It is clear that we need every tool at our disposal to combat viral illnesses and pandemics, and labs across the country are developing research that will create the vaccines and the therapeutics of tomorrow. But what this resolution does is create overbroad restrictions on scientific research in order to accomplish a goal which, unfortunately, is unrelated to what should be our highest goals. Bans like those envisioned by this resolution would tie the hands of researchers who are doing life-saving work. This resolution would send a dangerous signal that the United States Senate does not value life-saving research being conducted by our federal research agencies and at our world-class research universities. We must be prepared for future pandemics, especially as climate change accelerates the transmission of deadly diseases. In the last few months, we have seen H5N1 bird flu transmitted from dairy cattle to humans. This resolution could block researchers from understanding the mutations that allow bird flu to infect humans, effectively banning us from preventing outbreaks and protecting farm workers. Medical research is an issue of national security. Stronger research means stronger security. This resolution would not prepare us for emerging disease threats, and it would not make our nation safer. Bowing to political pressure to promote a research ban without understanding the implications on research, biosecurity, biosafety, or public health is dangerous, and it is reckless. Investments in biomedical research are investments in hope, in health, and safety that serve our country today and into the future. And for those reasons, Mr. President, I object.
President.
Objection is heard. Senator from Kansas.
Mr. President, certainly I understand the Senator from Massachusetts' comments and his concerns. I would still continue to argue that the benefits have not outweighed the risk. We've not seen any benefits from this type of research. And the whole concept, I'm just going back to what the definition of is for viral gain of function research is, we wouldn't do it if it's causing potential for harm. But we could still continue to research flu vaccines. We can continue to research avian influenza. There's all sorts of things we could do, but let's not make avian influenza worse. Let's not put on a protein spike on it that's going to make it stick to human lung cells like they did with SARS-CoV-1. The justification of gain-of-function research hinges on its purported benefits as you described, such as improved preparedness for pandemics. However, it's important to scrutinize whether these benefits are indeed reliable and they outweigh the risk. Critics argue that the knowledge gained from such research can often be obtained through safer means, such as computational models or studying natural outbreaks. Moreover, these resources invested in high-risk research can be redirected towards strengthening public health infrastructure, improving our surveillance system, and developing broad-spectrum antivirals and vaccines. Let's quit throwing good money after bad money. Let's take good care of the American taxpayer dollars and actually do things that are going to protect them from future pandemics. I yield the floor.
He's North Carolina.
Mr. President.
Senator from North Carolina.
Thank you, Mr. President. Under President Biden, nearly 10 million illegal immigrants have entered our country. Now, among those 10 million are an unknown number of dangerous individuals. We know that hundreds of individuals appear on the terrorism watch list. We know that a significant number of transnational cartel members are in this population. Other categories include drug smugglers, human traffickers, and many more. There's a laundry list of bad actors who have no business stepping foot in our country. And sadly, it's not a surprise when we allow over 500,000 illegal immigrants with criminal records into the homeland that they commit crimes against American citizens. Even members of law enforcement, the very people entrusted with keeping us safe, are now on the front lines of the border crisis. And no, I'm not talking about police in border states like Texas or Arizona. I'm talking about North Carolina, my state. I'm talking about New York City. 2 years ago in my home state of North Carolina, Wake County Deputy Sheriff Ned Byrd was killed in the line of duty by an illegal alien gang member who crossed the border under President Biden. And just this week in Queens, New York, NYPD officers were shot while trying to apprehend a suspect in a string of robberies. And one was shot in the stomach, and the other was shot in the leg. Now, thankfully, they're going to survive, and our prayers are with them and their families, and we're grateful for their service to our country. But the suspect was identified as a 19-year-old from Venezuela who crossed the border illegally through Eagle Pass, Texas, in July of last year. Worse yet, he was caught, and then he was released with a court date that he predictably ignored. So enough is enough. I'm back here on the Senate floor to once again try and pass a bill called the Police Act. It's a straightforward bill. The Police Act simply states that an alien can be deported for assaulting a police officer, a firefighter, or another first responder. But, and this bill has already passed the House, and it can be sent to the President's desk by passing it right here today. Pretty simple. But now, the last time I tried to pass this bill, the senator from Connecticut, he blocked it and he called it nothing. That's 100% wrong. Specifically, the Police Act, it amends the Immigration and Nationality Act to explicitly state that an illegal immigrant may be deported for assaulting a police officer. Now, it's important to point out that the current law does not cover all assaults against law enforcement. That means that some immigrants can remain in the country even after committing assaults against cops. And we know that under the Biden administration, that is a very real possibility, unfortunately. But the truth is that we cannot trust this administration to do the right thing or enforce the law and to keep our communities safe. That's why we need to pass the Police Act today. Any senator who claims to back the blue should have no problem at all supporting this bill. So I sincerely hope that in the face of yet another attack on police officers, that we could pass this bill today. And as in legislative session, and notwithstanding Rule 22, I ask unanimous consent that the Committee on Judiciary be discharged from further consideration of H.R. 2494 and the Senate proceed to its immediate consideration. Further, that the bill be considered read a third time and passed, and that the motion to reconsider be considered made and laid upon the table.
Is there objection?
Mr. President.
Senator from Connecticut.
Mr. President, reserving the right to object, the Border Patrol Union are law enforcement officers who patrol the southern and northern border, who serve this country, who protect this country, endorsed the bipartisan border security bill that my friend from North Carolina opposed, as did almost all of his colleagues. The Border Patrol Union, the organization that represents law enforcement officers, supported that bill for a number of reasons. It would have surged resources to the southern border to make sure that we properly administered our border and made sure that only people are coming to this country who have legitimate asylum claims. It would have invested in technology to make those Border Patrol officers' job easier. It would have granted new hiring authorities to make sure that we can get people down to the border faster rather than just redeploying agents from the northern border to the southern border. But it's likely that they supported that bill for an additional reason. Under current law, if you are coming to this country to apply for asylum, if you have a criminal history in the United States during a prior visit or in your home country, that question is not relevant under existing law until you go before an asylum judge, before you go before an immigration judge to make your asylum claim. Senator Lankford, myself, Senator Sinema, we thought that didn't make sense. We thought that that question of your prior criminal history should be relevant the minute that you show up at the border. Right? That you don't get into the United States to make your claim of asylum if you have a criminal history. That was part of the bipartisan border bill. That would have protected the country. That would have protected our law enforcement officers. But my Republican colleagues turned down the opportunity to pass bipartisan legislation that would prevent individuals with criminal records from coming into the country and applying for asylum. Because under current law that the president is bound to administer and enforce, those questions are not brought into the process until that asylum claim is being heard by a judge. And so it's just another example of the ways in which the bipartisan border bill, the bill that Republicans asked for, demanded Democrats negotiate, would have made this country safer, would have created a more efficient and more secure border. And I am still furious and heartbroken that Republicans decided to keep the border a mess because it helps their presidential candidate politically instead of trying to solve a problem. As for this specific measure, as I said last time I came to the floor to object, it is already, under current law, a deportable offense if you commit a crime of violence. It is already, under current law, a deportable offense if you commit and are convicted of any crime involving moral turpitude. And further, non-citizens who are convicted of any aggravated felony, including misdemeanor offenses, are deportable as well. So this bill is seeking to solve a problem that doesn't exist because current law says if you commit an assault on a law enforcement officer, you are going to be deported. And so why are we debating this bill if current law already says you can be deported for assaulting a police officer? Well, I don't know the answer, but what I know is that there is a broader effort underfoot by former President Trump and my Republican colleagues to try to make Americans believe that there is a specific, unique threat posed to you by immigrants, that you should fear people that are coming to this country to seek a better life or to flee terror or torture. It's a familiar trope because it was used against my forefathers when they came here from Ireland. It was used against those who came to the United States in prior generations. You should fear the Irish. You should fear the Italians. You should fear the Chinese. Today, it's you should fear those who are coming from Central and South America. But it's just not the truth. I know it is hard to hear for some folks that believe everything they watch on Fox News, but individuals who are first-generation immigrants to this country are less likely to be convicted of violent crimes than individuals who are born in this country. In 2020, the Trump DOJ sought to prove that false. They actually commissioned research to examine the rate of crime between non-citizens and citizens because they couldn't believe the data, because Fox News says that we should fear immigrants. Here's one of the papers that was commissioned by the Trump DOJ. We find that undocumented immigrants have substantially lower crime rates than native-born citizens across a range of felony offenses. Relative to undocumented immigrants, U.S.-born citizens are over 2 times more likely to be arrested for violent crimes, 2.5 times more likely to be arrested for drug crimes, and over 4 times more likely to be arrested for property crimes. These are quotes directly from a Trump-funded Department of Justice report. I don't disagree with my colleague from North Carolina. Of course, if someone commits an assault against a law enforcement officer, they should be deported from this country. If somebody commits an assault against a community member, regardless of their occupation, they should be deported from this country. That's what the existing law says. If you are convicted of a felony or a misdemeanor assault, any crime of moral turpitude, you are deportable. And so to me, this is duplicative at best, and at worst, an effort to just try to reinforce this very dangerous mythology that this country has something to fear from immigrants who are coming to this country to flee economic desperation and violence and terror and torture. And for that reason, I would object.
Objection is heard. Senator from North Carolina.
I appreciate my colleagues' comments. I believe them to be sincere. But let's not get lost in the swirl of eloquence here. I believe my colleague, he once said that illegal immigrants are undocumented Americans, direct quote, and that they are the people we care about the most, another direct quote. But I would submit that if you illegally enter the United States and then beat up a police officer, you are most certainly not an American. And the only thing that we should care about is that you're deported. Now, he said these laws can lead to deportation, but it's not necessary that they do, particularly under this administration. I'll refer to my prior remarks. There's been 500,000 of the illegal immigrants, 500,000, with criminal records that have come into the homeland, again, illegally. And it's no surprise that they commit crimes against Americans. So this bill, which he seems to support, I'm a little confused at his language. It seems like he might support this unanimous consent effort here because it's important because the current law does not cover all assaults against law enforcement. Deporting an illegal alien who assaults a law enforcement officer likely requires a complex legal analysis to prove that the illegal alien committed an aggravated felony or crime involving moral turpitude. It's not guaranteed that this process will even lead to deportation. So, The Police Act creates a simple, straightforward, common sense rule that says illegal aliens who assault cops are deportable, period, end of story. We saw it in North Carolina. We've recently seen it in New York City. And it could happen in a community near you. I yield the floor.
So I'm on the floor. President.
Senator from Vermont.
Mr. President, we have had a dismal history recently with the United States Supreme Court. My view is totally failed the American people. In the name of states' rights, the Supreme Court has taken away freedom and caused distress and uncertainty for women and individuals across the country. It's outrageous that because of this court and this decision, people have fewer rights today than they did 50 years ago. And of course, I refer to the Dobbs decision, which to its everlasting shame is a decision that the Supreme Court, for its infamy, took away a constitutional right. And it should be noted that in a post-Dobbs world, women are leaning on contraceptive care more and doctors see more demand. That now is threatened. And anyone who read that Dobbs decision and the Thomas concurrence in that decision, he laid it out where he at least intends to go. Now, there seems to be some confusion among my colleagues across the aisle about what this bill is and how important reproductive health care is. And I thank the President for his leadership on this with our colleague from Hawaii. It's very important, and everyone needs access, both to whatever birth control options make the most sense for them and to whatever preventive health care makes sense to them. Contraceptives can help prevent and treat medical conditions. And this is about ensuring every person in every zip code has access to the birth control that they need if they need it. This is a right of women and every individual to make decisions about their bodies and their futures. Politicians should not be involved. The court shouldn't even be intimating it is threatening to take that away, and this legislation is needed to guarantee they won't. After Roe was overturned in June 2022, Vermont voters went to the polls. They took their own liberty into their own hands, not being able to rely on the United States Supreme Court to protect it. And in Article 22 of the Vermont Constitution, a new amendment, it permanently protected reproductive liberties. It said that an individual's right to personal reproductive autonomy is central to the liberty and dignity to determine one's own life course and shall not be denied or infringed unless justified by a compelling state interest achieved by the least restrictive means. This would stop future anti-choice legislation from advancing in our state of Vermont. We enacted comprehensive legislation in 2019 in Vermont under a Republican governor that would, quote, recognize as a fundamental right the freedom of reproductive choice and prohibit public entities from interfering with or restricting the right of an individual to terminate the individual's pregnancy. And as far back as 1972, the Vermont Supreme Court became the fourth state in the nation to legalize abortion. Vermont has a long history of protecting reproductive rights and standing up for the rights of women. Also, Mr. President, contraception is supported by the American people. It's widely used. Women and people who can get pregnant need it and use it. 9 of 10 voters want it to be legal, and 3 out of 4 want it to have easier access. 78% said they see it as basic health care for women, and 72% are thankful it allows them to manage several health conditions. So, Mr. President, it is absolutely essential that in the face of the United States Supreme Court, what it did to deprive women of their own right to choose by reversing the Roe v. Wade decision that was so enshrined in our law, in part of our society for 50 years, that we in the Senate take all action possible to guarantee that women's rights will be protected. Mr. President, I yield back.
Mr. President, I'm so glad to come to the floor today to support my colleagues, you, Mr. President, Senator Markey, and Senator Hirono, as you champion a great and necessary bill, the Right to Conception Act. I'm proud to stand with my colleagues, and I'm so proud to support this bill. You know, today should have been a day of celebration. It was the 105th anniversary of the Senate passing the 19th Amendment, one of the greatest amendments ever passed, granting women the right to vote under the U.S. Constitution. That was truly a proud moment for this chamber and one of the greatest victories ever in the march towards women's equality, a march that New York proudly advanced. Upstate New York was a hotbed of women's suffrage movement, including places like Seneca Falls. But on this 105th anniversary of the 19th Amendment's passage, we must confront the ugly truth that women, sadly, have fewer freedoms today than they did just a few years ago. Because a few weeks from now, America will observe a different anniversary, a much darker anniversary, that of the Magna Supreme Court overturning Roe v. Wade. Thanks to that decision, and thanks to the hard rights war on women, reproductive freedoms are at their lowest point in modern history. And who knows how far the hard right will go. 2 years ago, the MAGA court eliminated the protections of Roe. Tomorrow, it could be something else. Maybe it could be the Griswold decision that protected the right to use birth control. To those who think that's outlandish or impossible to happen, just remember, Clarence Thomas himself opened the door to this possibility in his concurring opinion the day Roe was overturned. We're kidding ourselves if we think the hard right is satisfied with simply overturning Roe. And for all those who say it can never happen, remember, people said that before Dobbs, that Roe would never be overturned, and of course, unfortunately, it was by the right-wing MAGA court appointed by Donald Trump and our Republican colleagues here in the Senate. So tomorrow, the Senate will act. We'll vote to move forward on the Right to Conception Act. Supporting federal protections for contraceptives should be a definition of what is simple, common sense, and easy to choose to. The bill we will vote on tomorrow simply says, if you want access to birth control, or if you're a health care provider wanting to prescribe birth control, the government has no right to interfere. Doesn't that seem like common sense? After all, access to birth control is something 90% of Americans support. Of course, we're already hearing the same predictable, tired, and unpersuasive retorts from the other side. That this vote is somehow unnecessary, that birth control could never possibly be at risk, that this is much ado about nothing. That is simply not true. To those who argue federal protections for birth control are unnecessary, go ask the people of Virginia what they think after their Republican governor vetoed a bill that would have protected contraceptives at the state level. Go ask the people of Nevada what they think after their Republican governor also vetoed a bill to protect access to birth control. To those who say birth control will never fall at risk, go ask the people of Arizona or Florida or Idaho or Iowa or Missouri. In each of these states, Republican governors or Republican state legislators are on record blocking protections for birth control access in some form or another. It is unacceptable, simply unacceptable, for Americans to even question whether or not access to birth control should fall at risk. But that is precisely the worry 1 in 5 Americans have today. We can eliminate that worry in one fell swoop by passing the Right to Contraception Act. I hope both sides join together to show strong support for this essential bill tomorrow when we vote on it. I yield the floor. I yield the floor. Not yet. Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent that the confirmation vote on the Pipe nomination be at 12 noon tomorrow, Wednesday, June 5th, and that the cloture vote with respect to the Sullivan nomination occur upon disposition of the Pipe nomination. Further, that if cloture is invoked on the Sullivan nomination, all time be considered expired and the confirmation vote occur at a time to be determined by the majority leader in consultation with the Republican leader. Further, that following the cloture vote on the Sullivan nomination, the Senate then resume legislative session and resume consideration of the motion to proceed to calendar number 400, S 4381, and that the cloture motion with respect to the motion to proceed occur at 3:45 p.m. Finally, that if any of the nominations are confirmed during Wednesday's session, the motions to reconsider be considered made and laid upon the table, and the President be immediately notified of the Senate's actions. I yield the floor.
Is there objection? Without objection.
Mr. President.
Senior Senator from Massachusetts.
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise today because reproductive freedom is under attack. In 2022, Donald Trump's far-right Supreme Court took away the constitutional right to an abortion, completing the Republican Party's decades-long plan to overturn Roe. Now, in some states, the court's decision revived abortion bans that had lain dormant since the 1800s. In other states, the decision triggered new abortion restrictions pre-written to go into effect the very day that Roe v. Wade was overturned. The results have been horrific. But here's the thing the Republican Party missed. From Kansas to Ohio to California, reproductive rights are popular. Americans overwhelmingly support the right to an abortion, the right to IVF, and the right to contraception. In fact, these rights are so popular that Republicans want you to believe they support them. But their actions speak for themselves. First, Republicans said they wouldn't overturn Roe v. Wade. Donald Trump and his extremist Supreme Court did, and Trump is still bragging about it. Now, over 20 states have banned or severely restricted abortion access, passed laws criminalizing doctors who perform abortions, or threatened access to pregnancy care, miscarriage care, fertility assistance, and more. Then, Republicans claimed they wouldn't go after IVF. Just this year, Alabama's Supreme Court virtually outlawed IVF in the state. And just a few weeks later, my colleagues in the Republican Party blocked federal legislation that would protect access to this care. Now, the Republican Party is saying they won't go after contraception. Well, that makes sense, since 92% of Americans support birth control. But guess what? Republicans now have contraception in their sights, and they are even trying to redefine what constitutes contraception. Sure, they support contraception, but not an IUD. Or they're all for contraception, but not Plan B. Contraception is a must, except Republicans in Congress have a bill, quote, the Life at Conception Act, that would give an embryo so-called personhood rights, which would outlaw abortion, outlaw IVF, and yes, outlaw some forms of contraception. That bill has the majority support of the Republican caucus, including Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson. On top of that, Republicans blocked Democrats from passing this very same bill to protect the right to contraception last year. But tomorrow, every senator will have to say where they stand, proving that no matter what Republicans say about wanting to support contraception, when it comes down to it, they won't. Tomorrow's vote should be a turning point. It's time we take these Republican lawmakers at their word. Millions of people across this country are already experiencing a new form of hell thanks to Donald Trump and the extremist Supreme Court that overturned Roe. And Black, brown, and low-income communities are feeling a disproportionate impact. So now, as Donald Trump continues to push for a nationwide abortion ban and says he is looking at contraception, Democrats are standing up and fighting back. Already, President Biden and Vice President Harris have taken a series of steps to strengthen access to affordable, high-quality contraception and adequate access to reproductive health care more generally. And tomorrow, I will be joining my Democratic colleagues, led by my partner, Senator Markey, and by Senator Hirono and Senator Duckworth in voting for the Right to Contraception Act. Birth control is safe, effective, and an important part of reproductive health care. It is time that we fight back against the Republican war against reproductive freedom. It's time we codify the right to contraception into law. I am furious that millions of women have lost fundamental rights. I am furious that their freedom to make their own decisions has been taken away by a small number of extremists. I am alarmed by what the extremist Supreme Court and congressional Republicans are prepared to do to unravel a future of protection for women under a Republican presidency. This is about the right to make decisions about our own bodies and our own futures. It's all on the line, and we need these protections written into law. That is what tomorrow's vote is about. I don't want to hear from Republicans who say they support contraception but can't make it the law of the land. If they really support contraception, then they will vote yes on the bill that comes up tomorrow. If not, actions speak louder than words. They will demonstrate that it's not only going after abortion, it's not only going after IVF, it's also all about going after contraception. These are the decisions women should make for themselves. They should have the freedom to do that. These are not the decisions that should be made by extremist Republican lawmakers. Mr. President, I yield the floor.
Mr. President.
Senator from Tennessee.
Thank you, Mr. President. 105 years ago today, this chamber did something truly historic. It passed the 19th Amendment to secure the right to vote for American women. The amendment's ratification by the states 1 year later marked the largest enfranchisement in U.S. history, extending the vote to 26 million Americans. This incredible achievement fulfilled more than 70 years of tireless efforts by brave suffragists to make our country a more perfect union, including many Tennessee women. Abby Crawford Milton from Chattanooga, Ida B. Wells from Memphis, and Dallas Dudley from Nashville. On this anniversary, I'm especially reminded of Feb Byrne of Nyota, Tennessee. In the summer of 1920, the Tennessee General Assembly was in a heated debate about whether Tennessee would ratify the 19th Amendment. At the time, 35 states had already voted to ratify the amendment, so only one more was needed to make the 19th Amendment the law of the land. On the day of the vote in Nashville, Feb Byrne wrote a letter to her son, Harry Byrne, the youngest member of the Tennessee State Legislature. She urged her son to support the amendment. She wrote, and I quote, "Hurrah and vote for suffrage, and don't keep them in doubt," end quote. At first, Harry pinned a red rose, the symbol of anti-suffragist movement, to his shirt and voted to table the amendment in back-to-back deadlock votes. But with his mother's letter in his coat pocket, Harry ultimately listened to her advice, switched his vote, and switched to a yellow rose on that lapel, making Tennessee the 36th and final state to ratify the 19th Amendment. As the first woman to represent Tennessee in the U.S. Senate, I have a special appreciation for the women who fought this fight, and I've worked to honor their legacy and advance their cause. But as we remember the suffragists on this anniversary, it's important to recognize that women are still fighting for a seat at the table and recognition for their achievements. Look no further than the National Mall right here in our nation's capital. This 2-mile stretch of land, America's front yard as it is known, honors our nation's history and ideals with monuments, memorials, and statues of incredible Americans who have made tremendous sacrifices to make our country a more perfect union. Yet, among the 40 monuments, not one is dedicated to American women. That's why, alongside Senator Baldwin, I introduced the bipartisan Women's Suffrage National Monument Location Act, which would finally secure a monument honoring women's history on the National Mall. This monument will commemorate the women's suffrage movement, the passage of the 19th Amendment, and the incredible women who fought to secure the vote for millions of Americans. The House unanimously passed this legislation in November. Now the Senate should vote to make this memorial a reality and honor the giants who paved the way for generations of American women. Mr. President, I urge every member of this chamber to join Senator Baldwin and me in supporting the Women's Suffrage National Monument Location Act. I yield the floor and note the absence of a quorum.
The clerk will call the roll.
Ms. Baldwin.
Mr. President.
Senator from Connecticut,
Thank you, Mr. President. I ask that the quorum call be lifted.
without objection.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'm honored to join my colleagues and the presiding officer, whom I thank for his leadership, in voicing my support for the Right to Contraception Act. Truth be told, we shouldn't be here debating this issue. We shouldn't have to vote for legislation on it. Just 2 years ago, it would have been unimaginable that we would be turning the clock back, not to the early 1970s when Roe was decided, but to the 1960s when the United States Supreme Court decided a case called Griswold versus Connecticut. Yes, Griswold versus Connecticut, striking down the criminal prohibition against the use of contraception. That decision had a profound impact on women and American families, and it was all to the good. It, in effect, struck down a prohibition that was disregarded widely, but still followed with consequences that were both tragic and detrimental to women's health. Now we are in an era that regards the unthinkable as perfectly realistic when my Republican colleagues here and across the country are working to ban or restrict access to abortion care and attempting to limit the ability of families to have children through IVF. No one could have thought that was possible just a couple of years ago. But in the post-Dobbs era, it's not only possible, it is common. Griswold versus Connecticut is still the law of the land, but it has been undercut deeply by Dobbs, and it has undermined the ability of families to decide when and whether to have children. We're talking here not about abortion, but about contraceptive care, which gives women the chance to choose their own path in life and select their own timeline to pursue or continue an education or trade and advance further in the workforce. It gives them the freedom they deserve as to when to have children, as well as whether. This decision is deeply personal. I shouldn't have to say it. It should be a matter of assumption, but politicians in this building and in state capitals around the country take on the right to make that decision for everyone else, not just themselves. Now, if my Republican colleagues really care about families and children, I would suggest they turn their attention to improving their lives in this world and support families rather than forcing people to have children that maybe they are not prepared to care for. And if they really care about women, how about maternal health care? I am struck by the fact, in fact, I'm haunted by it, that maternal mortality rates in this country have actually been rising. Maternal mortality rates in the United States of America have been rising over recent years. It seems incomprehensible. Yes, we've cut infant mortality rates, but women still face heart disease, hemorrhage, infection, other kinds of complications, either before they give birth or within the year afterward, and of course, the mental health issues that can arise. So, to my Republican colleagues, if you care about women, Let's support the moms who decide to have children, but leave to them the decision about whether and when. In addition to determining their own futures, access to contraception is also access to critical health care. Since the landmark decision in Griswold, millions of women have safely used contraception to improve health outcomes for themselves and their family. Birth control is also crucial to anyone who has a life-threatening condition that prevents them from having a healthy pregnancy. Restricting access to birth control puts people in danger, preventable danger. Nearly 90% of women of reproductive age have used some form of birth control, and an overwhelming percentage of voters believe that access to contraception is a basic right. It is a basic right. Overturning Roe represented a significant regression in our law, in morality, in practical health outcomes. In the blink of an eye, younger generations were set back before their moms in their basic rights and protection, their access to health care. We have a responsibility in this body, at the pinnacle of our federal system, to make sure that there is federal protection against the attacks on reproductive care and ensure that generations of Americans don't have fewer rights than their parents. This bill is urgent in light of the continuing attack in state legislatures on women's access to health care and reproductive rights. I wish we weren't here, but we are, and we need to do the right thing. My colleagues have a choice. They can either support a woman's right to access contraception, or they can oppose this bill and oppose that right. I think there really is no question about how that choice should be made, and I hope they'll make it tomorrow when we vote on this measure. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the floor. Mr. President.
Senator from Connecticut.
Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent that the Senate proceed to legislative session and be in a period of morning business with senators permitted to speak therein for up to 10 minutes each.
Is there objection? Without objection.
Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent that the appointment at the desk appear separately in the record as if made by the chair.
Without objection.
I have 7 requests for committees to meet during today's session of the Senate. They have the approval of the majority and minority leaders.
Duly noted.
I understand that there is a bill at the desk, and I ask for its first reading.
The clerk will read the title of the bill for the first time.
S4447, a bill to allow women greater access to safe and effective oral contraceptive drugs, and so forth.
I now ask for a second reading, and in order to place the bill on the calendar under the provisions of Rule 14, I object to my own request.
Objection is heard.
I ask unanimous
Bill
consent.
will be read for the second time on the next legislative day.
Thank you. I ask unanimous consent that the Senate proceed to the en bloc consideration of the following Senate resolutions. Senate Resolution 719, Senate Resolution 720, Senate Resolution 721, Senate Resolution 722, Senate Resolution 723, Senate Resolution 724.
Is there objection to proceeding to the measures on block? Without objection. The Senate will proceed to the consideration of the measures on block.
I ask unanimous consent that the resolutions be agreed to, the preambles be agreed to, and that the motions to reconsider be considered made and laid upon the table, all en bloc.
Is there objection? Without objection.
I ask unanimous consent that the Senate proceed to the consideration of calendar number 378, Senate Resolution 385.
The clerk will report.
Calendar number 378, SRES 385, resolution calling for the immediate release of Evan Gershkovich, United States citizen and journalist, and so forth. Is there objection to proceeding to the measure?
Is there objection to proceeding to the measure? Without objection. The Senate will proceed to the measure.
I ask unanimous consent that the resolution be agreed to, the preamble be agreed to, and that the motions to reconsider be considered made and laid upon the table.
Is there objection? Without objection.
I ask unanimous consent that the Senate proceed to the immediate consideration of calendar number 380, Senate Congressional Resolution 18.
The clerk will report.
Calendar number 380, SCON Res 18, concurrent resolution calling for the immediate release of Mark Fogel, United States citizen and teacher, and so forth.
Without objection, the Senate will proceed to the measure.
I further ask that the committee reported substitute amendment to the concurrent resolution be agreed to, the concurrent resolution as amended be agreed to, the preamble be agreed to, and the motions to reconsider be considered made and laid upon the table with no intervening action or debate.
Without objection, so ordered.
I ask unanimous consent that the Judiciary Committee be discharged from further consideration of S 3237 and the Senate proceed to its immediate consideration.
The clerk will report.
S 3237, a bill to amend the Camp Lejeune Justice Act of 2022, and so forth.
Is there objection to proceeding to the measure? Without objection. The committee is discharged and the Senate will proceed to the measure.
I ask unanimous consent that the Tillis Amendment at the desk be considered and agreed to. Bill as amendment be considered, read a third time, and passed, and that the motions to reconsider be considered made and laid upon the table.
Is there objection? Without objection.
I ask unanimous consent that when the Senate completes its business today, it stand adjourned until 10 a.m. on Wednesday, June 5th, that following the prayer and the pledge, the Journal of Proceedings be approved to date, the morning hour be deemed expired, the time for the two leaders be reserved for their use later in the day, and morning business be closed. Following the conclusion of morning business, the Senate proceed to executive session to resume consideration of the Pipe nomination post-closure.
Without objection.
If there's no further business to come before the Senate, I move that it stand adjourned.
The question is on the motion. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say no. The ayes appear to have it. The ayes do have it. The motion is agreed to. The Senate stands adjourned until 10 a.m. tomorrow.